Negative reinforcement. That is a term that so many people use and so many people get wrong, but not on my watch. Hi, my name is Dr. Igor Juricevic, and this is Functional Analysis of Behavior 1. Let's go. All right, so last video we talked about operant conditioning, and I highly recommend, if you haven't seen that one yet, go and watch it before you watch this one, because today we're going to talk about the consequences, the types of consequences that are used in operant conditioning, specifically positive or negative reinforcement or punishment. So let's go back to Cooper, Heron, and Heward, and they say that positive and negative reinforcement and positive and negative punishment are determined by the type of stimulus change that follows a behavior and the effect that operation has on future occurrences of that type of behavior. So positive and negative reinforcement or punishment, those are descriptions of the kinds of consequences that are used in operant conditioning. They are the kinds of consequences that follow a behavior that then shape the future occurrences of that behavior. And today we're going to learn how to identify whether a consequence is positive or negative, and then also whether that consequence is reinforcement or punishment. So by the end of today, you will be able to identify all four major operant contingencies. That is positive reinforcement, the very tricky and very misunderstood negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. All right, so I'm going to let you know the only thing you need to know in order to identify whether a consequence is reinforcement or a consequence is punishment. And that's going to be our first step. What is the consequence? Is it reinforcement or is it punishment? So a behavior occurs, there's a consequence, and the way that you identify whether that consequence is reinforcement or punishment is what happens to the behavior in the future. And the rule is, if as a result of that consequence, that behavior increases in the future, that consequence was a reinforcer and that behavior has been reinforced. So reinforcement is a consequence that causes a behavior to increase in the future. On the other hand, punishment is a consequence that causes a behavior to decrease in the future. So you have the behavior, you have the consequence, and if that consequence causes a decrease in the behavior in the future, then that consequence was a punishment, and that stimulus or whatever occurred is known as a punisher. So that is it. That is all you have to consider to identify whether something is a reinforcement or a punishment, something is a reinforcer or a punisher. If the consequence causes a behavior to increase, then it's reinforcement. If the consequence causes the behavior to decrease, then it's punishment. All right, so now we got punishment and reinforcement clear in our minds. Now we're going to add the final touch and talk about positive and negative. So positive and negative combine with reinforcement and punishment to form the four contingencies: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment. So let's take each of those in turn so you can see exactly how they're identified. All right, so let's talk about positive reinforcement first. So positive reinforcement is reinforcement, as we just talked about. That means that the behavior that leads to a consequence increases in the future. And now, whether it's positive or negative has everything to do with how is that consequence introduced. So positive consequences, they are ones that are added to the organism's environment, hence positive. So in this example here, the woman embraces her loved one. The loved one adds the behavior of carrying her up the stairs. That leads to an increase in embraces later. So we already talked about that this was reinforcement, but it's that adding of the behavior of carrying the person up the stairs that makes it positive. So in this case, positive reinforcement. All right, now we get to negative reinforcement. Again, this is the one that everybody gets wrong, and it comes from the fact that the term negative has connotations in our society that are carried over in a lot of people's understandings. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to remember very hard, we're going to have to try to keep this in our mind, that in functional analysis of behavior, in applied behavior analysis, negative has a very different meaning. It doesn't mean something bad. It doesn't mean something unwanted. What it means is something is taken away. So negative reinforcement is when the consequence of a behavior is that something is taken away, and because of that taking away, that behavior increases in the future. So for example, Jim here has been working overtime. That is the behavior. The consequence of that behavior is that when he came home, instead of having to make the coffee, Nick already made the coffee for him. So he took away that requirement, that responsibility, that task of making coffee. And because of that, Nick is now more likely to work overtime in the future. So in this case, overtime has been negatively reinforced. It's more likely to occur in the future because something in Jim's environment, that is the task of making coffee, was taken away. It was subtracted from his environment. Hence, it was a negative change, negative in the sense of things decreased. But now the behavior that led to that consequence is going to increase in the future. He's going to work more overtime. Hence, negative reinforcement. All right, so now we're going to change over to punishment. And we're going to start with what most people think negative reinforcement actually is. So you just learned what negative reinforcement really is. So the next time you encounter somebody talking about negative reinforcement, if they haven't watched this video, chances are that what they think is negative reinforcement is actually positive punishment. And one of the most common examples in our society historically of positive punishment was spanking. So I like to use Golden Age comics to illustrate some of my concepts. And if you think that it was difficult to find panels of people getting spanked in Golden Age comics, you'd be wrong. Yeah, there's a few. All right, so we're going to choose one where we can actually see what behavior led to the consequence and see how this is a positive punishment. So in this case, we have a mother disciplining her daughter, and her daughter ran off in her mother's best gown and crashed a grown-up dance while she should have been in bed. So that was the behavior, running off in her best gown, crashing the dance. That was the behavior. Now that led to the consequence of the spanking. And the spanking in this case was something that was added to this girl's environment. It was something that was added to this girl's experience. And if that addition of the pain from getting physically punished, if that addition leads to a decrease in this crashing of a grown-up dance, then that crashing of a grown-up dance has been positively punished. So the decrease in the future, that makes it punishment, but the fact that something was added to cause that decrease in the future, that makes it positive. So the decrease makes it punishment. The addition of the spanking into this environment, into this person's world, that makes it positive, hence positive punishment. So positive punishment is what people often refer to as negative reinforcement. So we need to change that. So the next time, hopefully, that somebody uses negative reinforcement wrong, I hope you step up, let them know that it's actually positive punishment, and we'll start the revolution. All right. Oh boy. This video is going to be heavily edited. All right, and then the last contingency we're going to talk about is negative punishment. And negative punishment is when a behavior occurs, in this case jaywalking, and then something is taken away from this individual's environment. In this case, their freedom is taken away. So their freedom is taken away, and that leads to less jaywalking in the future. So the jaywalking caused the freedom to be taken away. That's negative. And because that freedom being taken away led to a decrease in jaywalking behavior in the future, that's punishment. Hence, taking away, putting somebody in jail is negative punishment. All right, so that's it for today's video. So we took a look at reinforcement and punishment. We took a look at the 4 major contingencies: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. We learned what that really is: positive punishment and negative punishment. So that's it for today. Come on back next time when we're going to set our sights on target behaviors, and we're going to start talking about how to select those, how to handle those, and the importance of knowing your target behaviors. But until then, stay frosty, stay functional, and I'll see you next time. Combine with positive and negative. So positive and negative multiply with reinforcement and reinforcement and punishment. All right, serious.